In a world with artificial intelligence, how do we transform education? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez, and this is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and impacts of AI across education. If you'd like to join the conversation, check out the AIeducationconversation.com. Let's jump in. Chris Agnew, let me officially welcome you to the AI Education Conversation. Really excited to have you today.
I am so happy to be here, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Chris, I know we've spent a little bit of time just off mic here being able to talk to each other and really excited for this conversation, but would invite you first and foremost of, for the folks who are listening and tuning into this episode, why should they listen to our conversation that we're about to have? And what would you hope that they would get out of it?
So there is so much noise in AI right now, AI broadly, and then certainly AI within education. And I would hope at the end of this that listeners could feel like they might have a couple tangible frameworks to start structuring some of their thinking around AI and its applications in education and specifically K-12. I think, or I hope that they would also gain a little bit of awareness on where we're at with the research and what the research is saying about AI and education, and not just the hype, but like what is actual studies telling us right now. And more importantly, in that realm, where they can go to get some more information and educate themselves. And here's the secret in all of this that I want to give everybody who's listening a permission to do with this topic is my hope is people are walking away on this topic with AI and education with the feeling of permission to be a beginner on this topic, in
Mm.
that it can feel inaccessible. It can feel like there's a bunch of technology first people that are experts in this realm. And you know, I am a high school principal. What do I have to add? How can I tackle this topic? And if you're to take away one thing from this is there's a lot of noise in AI in education. There are no experts. We are learning this as we go. And so it is imperative on all of us to lean in and start experimenting and get curious and explore ideas you have, and being approaching it with a beginner's mind is actually a superpower, and people should feel ready and encouraged to do that.
Yeah, well said. I think especially the perspective there of saying with so much noise in the field, what does the research tell us and what can we learn from the research feels like a really important lens to explore as we really think about optimal the optimal role that artificial intelligence really can play in our educational experience. I know that in your day role, in your day-to-day job now, you are the director for generative AI for education, the hub at Stanford. I'm curious, like, how'd you get there?
Yeah, so I do not have the standard background to come to and be thinking about technology specifically as it applies to education. So a little bit around my 25 years in education. So I spent 2 decades working in non-traditional learning environments that were both adjacent to K-12 and post-secondary. And when I say non-traditional learning environments, what I mean by that is wilderness as a classroom, community as a classroom, apprenticeship as a classroom, service learning, things like that. Learning environments that are immersive, experiential, project based, hands on, that often teach many of the skills that as educators we know are of increasing importance in success in work and life, often referred to as 21st century skills in the categories of social emotional learning or durable skills. People call them many things, but ways to communicate, teamwork, things like that. In 2015, I took a role leading an organization called the Teton Science Schools. And Teton Science Schools, we had a K-12 school. We hosted school groups from around the country to learn next generation science standards in the national parks. And we had a graduate school for education in partnership with several universities and colleges. And for me, it was this amazing opportunity to do what I'd been aspiring to do much of my career in blending the more formal academic setting of learning, often in the classroom, with this more experiential learning and community learning outside of the classroom and in more relevant and hands-on ways. And I was there 6 years and I left in early 2021. And I left for a couple different reasons. One, just fatigue and keeping school doors open during COVID, of course, like many education educators and education leaders in that time. But second reason was actually more important. I'd worked these 2 decades in these immersive learning environments. And this organization I led was based in Jackson, Wyoming, one of the most philanthropic locations in the country. And what I learned is the business model for these immersive learning environments was broken. Even with massive philanthropy, there was no path to scale and access for students. It, there was no path forward. And I recognized, even with massive philanthropic gifts, if this isn't possible here, how could it be possible for the millions of kids across our country that need these learning environments? And so recognize technology has to play a role in this. And I did not previously have an experience working in ed tech. And so I spent the last 3+ years working for a couple of venture back ed tech companies, most recently working for a company called Multiverse, founded in the UK, using apprenticeships as an alternative to university. They entered the US market. I was earlier on the US team and I held US higher ed strategy and credentials. And while at Multiverse, I got my first kind of aha moments around AI. So, and this I think is a great application for what I think some of the real promise AI has in actually making education more human, ironically or paradoxically. So here was the early application. So at Multiverse, we had coaches, human coaches that worked with the apprentices. The coaches were the learner facer, like a teacher, an instructor. And all apprentices' student work were based on real products and real deliverables that they created working on the job. So all of it was authentic assessment. And these outstanding coaches would spend hours every week grading these spreadsheets or slide decks or whatever it was that the apprentices were creating on the job. And the coaches would review this authentic student work against the student outcomes that the apprenticeship needed to hit. Important work, truly authentic assessment, really time intensive. And so we started thinking about and working on how to leverage AI to review student work and match it to the expected learning outcomes of this period of the apprenticeship. And it would still be human reviewed at the end. But the goal was, can we reallocate what previously these coaches were spending sitting in front of their computer, staring at spreadsheets? And can we save them time so they can get more one-to-one time working directly with apprentices and the time that really matters in apprentice learning? And in that moment, I recognized there might be something here with AI. In my whole career working in these environments where learners engaging with the real world, doing real work, project based, that type of learning is really hard to create, is operationally complex, and can be expensive to run. And those have been historically so many of the barriers that have prevented it from accessing all the kids that truly need it. And could AI create an opportunity where this type of learning, this more hands-on, human-first learning is actually more accessible to more learners broadly? And so that's what got me really excited about AI, and ultimately, fast forward a few months, landed me kicking off and leading our generative AI for education hub that's part of the Stanford Accelerator.
Wow, I really appreciate that arc there, and so much of that is something I didn't even, did not come up in some of our initial conversations. So I have so many reactions. I'm curious to make sure I'm understanding the initial learning though from the multiverse piece. It sounded like the AI use case that you all really landed on that was highly effective in that context is similar to what some of our schools have found right now, which is AI was you were really able to help leverage AI to lean into more of the like operational, some of the like administrative type work and as a means to try to make that more efficient so that your human talent resources were like had more time to lean into the pieces that felt much more complicated to deploy AI to use, especially like in a service learning context. Is that the right way to think about it? Because I'm just so fascinated to think about how we scale service learning type experiences as well. And I want to make sure we don't lose that thread.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm glad you're drilling down on that. So I'll introduce one framework here to start organizing some of our thoughts. So in our work with lots of districts and schools across the country and states, we're noticing that often practitioners are approaching AI, kind of the why use AI, for one of three different reasons. The first is the efficiency play, and I think is a little bit about what you're talking about on, can it streamline a system? Can it save me some time? Which is, there's real value in that. And it's an optimization play, right? But efficiency, can it save me time? That's one. Second category, now we get into the more why we're in education, teaching and learning. And the second category is generally around outcomes. Can AI help us move the needle on outcomes? And it could be about literacy outcomes, it could be about better personalization or differentiation, it could be about getting better at assessing the things that we found a hard time previously assessing, things in the social emotional realm, but it's all around moving the needle on outcomes. And the last category that I think for me is always really important to talk about, connected to the first two, is how can we think about or use AI to reimagine school? So the first two is about kind of existing or improving what is. The third is about reimagining what's possible with this powerful new technology that we have. And it can be easy for, and especially with most of generative AI right now lives in the private sector. And as a result, many to most of those companies are venture backed companies that have a timeline to get to profitability. And so they need to solve real problems now, which is great. And while solving the problems of next week or next semester as a school practitioner, school leader, we also have to be thinking about a more aspirational vision. And this brings me back to where we started, of the real powerful ways that Gen AI could push and evolve education in the future. On how does it change the structure of a school day? How does it change? How could it change what school actually looks like? How it connects to real life, connects to community. So bringing it back to specifically your question, I would say this multiverse example falls into I'd say first two categories. It's in the realm of assessment, right? Where there is lots of interesting promise around AI and its applications in the realm of assessment. So there's the speeding of assessment, in that, can we get students feedback faster and save teachers time in doing so? That's great. And I would say it also starts to bridge into the outcomes category as well. And I'll tell you one story about actually some research that we've just kicked off actually last week about feedback on student writing, where AI can be a tool for teachers to get feedback on student writing much quicker. And in this case, it's not only about speed, where, say, an eighth grader might have turned in their 2-page, 5-paragraph essay, and the teacher now has uh, many essays to grade, that it might take them 2 weeks to turn around and get feedback to those students on their essay. Here's an example where, could AI be effective in getting feedback to students faster, measured in a few days rather than a couple weeks? And what that allows is the student can get 3 reps on their essay. They can submit one draft, get feedback on that, AI generated feedback, teacher reviewed. The student can take that, integrate feedback, submit a second draft, same cycle, AI generated feedback, teacher reviewed. They integrated that feedback and then get a third. So in that 2 weeks time where previously they got 1 rep on their writing with feedback, in this case, they've gotten 3 reps on it. And can that move the needle on their writing skill?
I'm so grateful that you're the person doing the AI work with the background that you have, because I think if I were to try to speak for, I think a voice that I hear out in the field, I think a fear that many folks in education, and I would put myself included into this boat, is that the one of the potential scenarios we're walking towards with the deployment of AI and technology in the classroom is just every student on a laptop all day doing little modules, sitting and not really moving throughout the world, gaining anything in the world, right? That outside of this like laptop that they have. And I think that there's tremendous learning and value, of course, that one can gain by accessing and engaging with technology. But the role of education, and I think very much in the ways that you've described, it's not just about the knowledge acquisition or even the skill development. It's about the self-actualization that can happen throughout those experiences. And I just think as an example about some of the most meaningful moments I have throughout my career helping young people apply and successfully attend colleges. And so much about that experience is not about just applying to the schools and the X's and O's of doing that. It was about a lot of kids getting on a plane for the first time and having that experience and going to a completely new place and like just being in a new environment and all of the emotion and experiences that are coming up from them. And then being able to connect that to skills throughout life that they're going to need. In life, you're going to have to take risks and it's scary, but it's also can lead to growth, right? And lessons like that, that then allow them to have just growth and new, just unlock new facets of what it means to be human on the earth. And I think we cannot lose sight of that within education. We need to continue to run towards that. And technology, I think, can play a meaningful role, but it should not be replacing that or diminishing that. And I just love that you are leading this work with knowing that that is going to be something you're going to hold very dearly as the person making decisions about that. So just really wanted to double click that because I see why those two things are so important. And I think a lot of folks listening to this are going to understand that as well.
Oh, I love that you highlighted that, and I get so excited thinking about that because to me that's the whole ball game there as far as using the opportunity to use AI to actually bring more human oriented, child centric learning is possible. And we are at this key inflection point right now on you can envision a very dystopian world of, as you said, a bunch of kids with big headphones on staring at individual computers plugged in, quote unquote, learning, and AI empowered. You can see a world that this creates way more powerful learning with kids outside of the classroom, learning in teams, inside their community, helping teachers assess skills that we never knew possible how to assess at scale before. But now we can understand how to help this child get better at their communication and this child get better and measure their progress and teamwork because of this powerful new technology. It makes it, I think, I get really excited about that. And I'll say one more thing and we can dig into this more in the future. But there's a lot, for the last at least 2 decades, the holy grail in education often has been personalization of like, let's personalized education, which is wonderful. Like each human, each learner has their own strengths, gaps, areas for improvement, blind spots. And the more we can help young people accelerate when they're ready to accelerate and spend more time when they need to spend more time, that's a good thing. And, and I think this is important around AI, we should not confuse personalization of education with isolation of education.
Mm.
And there is a hazard in confusing personalization with learning in isolation, in that kind of plugged into my own laptop. And I see a future where AI enables more team based learning, more learning through project, that allows the development of all those skills that we know to be so essential for life, for career in the future, around teamwork and leadership and conflict negotiation, that if we play full personalization out to the learning through isolation, kids are not going to have the opportunity to get.
Personalization, not isolation. Well said. Chris, if I was a fly on the wall in your conversations since you've been in this role on this journey, representing Stanford, doing so much work with AI in education, like what would I see? What types of conversations have you been a part of? What are you talking about?
So we started the Generative AI for Education Hub about in July of 2024. So it's been, what's a quick math on that? About 9 months. And we've spent that period of time understanding what our key value add here is. There are a lot of players focusing on AI in education, and there's a lot of work to be done. And so we wanted to be sure that we were playing a unique role that would complement all the other outstanding work being done by other research institutions, by other nonprofits, by other ed tech companies, et cetera. And so, what we have established as the purpose of the Generative AI Hub is to be the trusted source for education leaders. So, specifically, superintendent, state, and federal K 12 leaders. So, we're talking system leaders that have the ability to scale impact, to be that trusted source for them on what's working, leveraging generative AI to benefit students, schools, and learning. And we have three core priorities in that. One is research, two is tools, three is engagement. So breaking those down, research, one is we're in a very nascent stage with generative AI in education. And so we want to do two things here. We want to focus the spotlight on what we know that's research back right now around generative AI and K 12. And actually, just in January, we launched the research repository. I'll get to more on that later, but shine the spotlight to evolve the conversation from where we've been for the last 2.5 years, which is about use case generation around Gen AI, which is great, but evolve that to also include efficacy. So, where are we starting to see impact? Where are we starting to see real promise? So, we can double down in those areas, and then starting to conduct our own research as well. So we have two research projects that are in flight right now, and we have a lot in the pipeline to come. So that's research. Tools, we're not talking like we're building ed tech tools here. We're talking about building tools for practitioners to help them make better decisions for the districts and schools and state education systems that they lead. So this is example policies or playbooks or best practices or things like that. And then lastly, engagement. This is about bringing together for this work to be effective. We have to bring together ed techs, we have to bring practitioners, states and districts, and researchers so we can push forward what we're learning faster. And so the theme of a lot of this work right now is speed to insight. Historically, education research has been not particularly fast and maybe very rigorous, maybe often finding wonderful insights and impactful insights. But what's different now is this technology is changing so fast, uh, and that we could build an amazing research study over 2 school years, over 3 school years. And we put our heads down, we do that work. And in December 2027, we come out with some amazing insights on that. And I know superintendents and state leaders might say, that's wonderful. I wish I knew it 2 years ago. It's totally irrelevant now because the technology, the tools, the applications have changed entirely. And so our challenge is how do we break down the barriers to doing research and get these insights out faster, even if they are not definitive yet, but they are early indicators of that. Here's what we know right now. And there were some great early models of this, particularly started during the pandemic. The Center for Reinventing Public Education did some great work during COVID on kind of rapid cycle research on what schools were doing at certain moments in time during the pandemic and sharing that out in really effective ways for practitioners to access to help schools evolve their best practices during COVID. And so I think that's a great model for how we can approach, while not a pandemic, a different fast moving topic, which is generative AI. And then the second theme, well, the one theme of speed to research, and then the second theme that we've been talking a lot about is this is such an, bridging research to practice is a commonly used term in education. I think often because it's so hard to do. Good research can happen and it actually doesn't change what's happening in schools. And so something we talk about every day is ways that this can be made more practical, more actionable for the district CTO who's making buying decisions on if and what Gen AI powered K-12 edtech tool they might be considering.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's so much there that you're sharing, and and as you said, I'm excited to get into the repository and what that's starting to shape up as in just a second here. But so much of what you just said resonates, and I think like what's coming up for me is to transform education in the United States is just so difficult because of how decentralized the system is. And the spectrum and the context of schools is so vast and so large, from urban districts to rural districts and everything in between, and they all have different and unique needs. And what I'm wondering is, as you all are thinking about not just like making this practical, but like what do you ultimately it maybe the question underneath my question is, we had a pandemic. And even through that pandemic, there was some changes such as like laptops are much more ubiquitous than they were before the pandemic at most schools. But what I'm also noticing is a lot of things immediately reverted back to what they were before, right? So the system is very persistent. And what is it about the combination of these three things or your unique approach that maybe creates some confidence that you all can approach it in a different way to inform a system that has been really persistent over the last 100 plus years is my not so easy question.
Yeah, I would say no easy answers there. And I certainly feel like we have a unique gift in at the generative AI hub in kind of how we're situated and our kind of peer departments that we get to work with. So a little background here. So our research lead is Dr. Susanna Lowe. Susanna was a tenured professor at Stanford for a couple decades, and then she left Stanford. This is pre-pandemic to lead the Annenberg Institute for Public Education at Brown University, and she was there during the pandemic as well. And in the early days of the pandemic, Susanna and a small team stood up something called the National Student Support Accelerator. And so the National Student Support Accelerator, their goal or what they were foreseeing was, okay, kids going to remote virtual school, a pandemic in flight here. There's massive potential for learning loss and learning gaps. We know that there's a lot of good research around that the best way to mitigate and close those gaps is high impact tutoring. But they recognized that the barrier to high impact tutoring was operationalizing it for system leaders. So if a superintendent in the early days of COVID, it's like, oh, how am I going to make sure that the students that need it the most don't fall further behind? They say, okay, high impact tutoring, yeah, well and good. There's great research. That seems expensive or that seems complicated for my district. I don't know what to do. So they started the National Student Support Accelerator in mid 2020. And over the last 4 years, they have seen great success. And they built basically this recipe of research, tools, and engagement with, in their case, they had those same priorities, research, tools, and engagement, but where for the Gen AI Hub, we are research first because that the field of research for Gen AI is so early. for high impact tutoring, there was a big body of good research around high impact tutoring. So they went to tools first. And how do we actually operationalize this and help this make sense, actionable, and applicable to a school leader in Tennessee or a district leader in Washington, D.C., across a variety of different contexts across our country. And in the last 4 years, they saw massive influence around district policies, state policies, and even national recommendations around high impact tutoring. Is a response to the pandemic initially, but to persist to be a highly effective tool to serve the students that need it most so they can catch or close gaps that they have. And so through that, so 2 years ago, Susanna came back to Stanford. And in coming back to Stanford, she came back to start the Scale Initiative, which is about systems change for advancing learning equity. And the NSSA team came to Stanford with her to be a component of the Scale team. And to give the full origin story of the Gen AI Hub, the NSSA was doing a lot of research around high impact tutoring too. And as we know, many of the very first Gen AI applications to education were around tutoring because of the obvious kind of V1 applications with the technology as it exists. And through that research, they recognized, to state in many ways, the obvious of this Gen AI thing is going to be a thing that we need to dedicate a whole focused body and hub to, which then initiated the Gen AI hub. But we're a sister kind of department to the NSSA, and being able to learn from them in helping create systems change that is contextualized within different districts, within different states, but also practical and actionable for their context, I think will be really helpful for us. And the last thing I'll say on that is, we're recording this right now at a time, 1 or 2 days after by executive order, the Department of Education has been dissolved. And what that's going to create is a lot more onus on the states and opportunity at the states, a lot more leadership at the states. And as you said, which is so accurate to the US education system, we have always been in a very decentralized system. That maybe the one glimmer of opportunity here is that there are going to be 50 different laboratories of innovation for what Gen AI can and should look like. And our ability to be able to research what's happening in each one of those laboratories and understand the really promising bright spots, and to be able to take the research on what's happening in this state or in this district that is outstanding, that's moving the needle on efficiency or student outcomes or reimagining schooling, and to then be able to convert that into tools to bring it to more system leaders across the country. That's our hope, to have that system level change still around the country.
Yeah, I would especially double click on that last point, which is, I find just in my experience interacting with a lot of systems leaders, and even in my own decision making as someone who makes decisions, that impact many teams, oftentimes one of the biggest motivators in those decision making processes is going to be what you're held accountable to, like your goals, those policies and those things. And obviously schools, districts, they're looking at their report cards, they're looking at the highest needs, they're looking at where fundings come from, and that's going to be a really large motivator of a lot of decisions that were made. But to your point, I think we're entering this season where the answer to those questions feels murkier than probably it's ever been before. And even at a state level, I mean, there's a lot of states, as an example, here in Massachusetts. I mean, over the last year, there was a decision made to repeal back the MCAS, which is like a pretty well-known state standardized exam as a graduation requirement. And I think the impact of that is there's a lot of folks now crawling across the state asking themselves, well, if it's not the MCAS, then how will we define success, and what is going to be the standard for allowing our young people to graduate, and the requirement we want to hold them to? And I think to your point, in those moments where states and entities are looking for answers, having organizations such as the organization you're leading and other places, and having that research, having those tools, I think can really help to support their decision making when they're actually really looking for answers and there isn't like set of ascribed frameworks. And so those conditions might make this like a very interesting time to be deploying these types of work streams as well. So maybe to dive further into this, you had talked about how as a part of launching this hub, a lot of that was informed by the sister hub and the work that they did in their theory of change. But what I also heard you say is the other part of this was also about doing a landscape analysis and looking across the field and asking ourselves, what are some of the organizations across, the world, the country doing? What are they not doing? And I'm curious, what are you noticing high level about where we seem to be building momentum and where we're not building any type of momentum?
I love that you went there, Daniel. So this gets a little bit to our forming research agenda around Gen AI and K-12 and how we're thinking about our priorities in different research projects we're taking on. So right now, we're largely thinking about our research happening in three different categories. There is, as you said, the landscape mapping, and this is understanding what's happening, what people are using, how take up is changing over time. Right now, we can all probably think back to LinkedIn posts we've seen in the last 2 weeks of such and such entity surveyed 1,000 teachers and 10% are using AI weekly. And then I swear, like 3 days later, you see a different survey from a different, very reputable organization that surveyed 2,000 teachers and found out that 70% are using AI weekly. We see numbers all over the place. And generally, what we have right now to understand the landscape is a lot of survey data, which is a great place to start. And the first part of our research agenda is in mapping that landscape. We want to evolve where we are right now, which is a lot of surveys, to start looking at real user data in working with districts and ed techs on how much time people are spending on their platforms. Where are they clicking? What tools are they using? What is causing them to increase use or decrease use? How is their use changing over time? And this one will give us a good baseline understanding of what use looks like right now. See some contributors which are leading to is take up increasing or not? What is causing people to use it more or not? And I think really importantly, start to identify areas of, oh, in this, maybe we learn that teachers are largely using it for lesson planning, or maybe not. Maybe we're learning that they're largely using it for assessment or for exit tickets. In learning where behavior is gravitating to, then that can inform the next stage and next category of our research agenda, which is around efficacy. So we can start to zero in on, okay, teachers or students are spending more time in these areas. So let's investigate efficacy around assessment or efficacy around lesson planning. So efficacy is next kind of research category. Is it moving the needle on the things we care about? Largely being learning outcomes. And then last category of research agenda as it's starting to take shape is what we're calling enabling conditions. So what we want to understand and start to research around this are what are the conditions that need to be in place that help for highly effective AI take up in a district with a school within a state? What are the policies that are in place? What are the PD practices for teachers, et cetera, et cetera? And so to review, we've got landscape mapping, we've got efficacy, and we've got enabling conditions. So right now, as I mentioned, we have 2 research projects that are in flight, and then we have a lot in the pipeline. What's in flight right now is in the category of landscape mapping. And I would say this is not definitive. This is just really early indicators. So nobody should hang their hat on this. And I'm sharing this only to get people curious to want to look for more research to come on this. But what we're starting to see some indicators on in comparing AI take up across contexts is that when we look across difference of, say, Title I schools or more resource schools, generally speaking, schools are across more well-resourced schools and Title I schools are trying AI out similar rates, and they're sticking with it at similar rates. So we're not seeing a delta between higher need schools, more well-resourced schools. Also, across race ethnicity, so districts with higher percentage of students of color versus districts that are more predominantly white students. So also, we are not seeing significant difference in schools trying out AI tools or like persisting with those AI tools. The one area that we are seeing a more significant delta on is urban school districts and suburban school districts are both trying out AI and sticking with AI at similar rates. But we're seeing that rural schools are the one area that are both trying and persisting with AI at much lower rates. And so this is like very early insights as far as looking at take up across some different contexts, but is something that we want to investigate a lot more, and is a important early question to understand.
Yeah, I appreciate you walking me through, especially that example, to contextualize that further, because I do think there's going to be a lot of maybe predictions or feelings about how AI is going to be deployed. I mean, even to your point of even the LinkedIn timeline, those surveys that you're mentioning, those I see that all the time as well. So maybe let me also ask you this. It seems like some of that initial AI hype is really subsided in the last, I would say, maybe about 6-ish months, especially for schools. I think even before, I think there was some kind of consensus that AI literacy at the very least was important, that actually is something we should prioritize in schools, that we should make space for it. Now I'm even seeing a little bit of pushback there of like, is that actually really important? And I'm just wondering, are you all noticing the same thing? And is that coming up in your convenings or in the research happening there? I'm just wondering if that's something that you all are noticing as well.
I would fully agree with you that the blind hype has passed, which I think is a great thing because it can help us move to a more critical, practical, what does this mean stage. So I'll introduce one framework that I think is really helpful just to analyze a couple different approaches schools are taking. So COSIN, which is led by Keith Kruger, which is an association that supports district technology leaders across the country. They do an annual survey about what is top of mind for technology leaders at districts. And they are classifying schools kind of into, well, one of three categories. They're either the ban it outright category, the let every flower bloom category of like, well, just let all the teachers experiment and do a bunch of different things, or the duck and cover of like, oh, this feels really complicated. It might pass over us. Let's just like put our heads down and hope it gets easier in the future. And, but I would say, one, we do know that AI is not going anywhere. What its role will be in education is we are in early days of that, what that looks like, what best practices are there. But we know in the world, in the workforce world, in generally college and career, AI is going to play a role. So simply from a fact of preparing young people for a future, AI plays a role in there somewhere, even if it's in the realm only of AI literacy. And I do feel like, and I talk to state and district technology leaders a lot, and I do sense from all of them a pressure to do something. And I empathize with that, and that's why at the beginning of the episode, one of the things I led with is this permission to approach it with a beginner's mind of, "Hey, you are a leader. You might be in a leadership role at your school. at your district, in your department. And as a leader, you might feel a pressure to have all the answers. But I have a secret for all of you that is quite liberating, I think. Nobody knows exactly where it's going. Even the heads of the largest LLMs or tech companies don't know where this is going long term. So it's this great opportunity to truly approach it with a beginner's mind of getting curious and playing with the tools and asking questions about how could this be helpful? How might this fit with what we're grappling with right now, what our needs are, what we're struggling with? And I think that can be a more productive way to navigate the pressure of to do something, because that is everywhere. Of like, it AI is a core part of all education conferences now. So many webinars and teacher PD sessions, it's everywhere. So that feeling do something exists, but the like, so what do I do? That's the hard part. And that's where we're in the space right now of what does AI mean for education? Where is the impact? And what does this look like in practice? I will say one more thing though. I recently learned this new term called technology overhang that Ethan Mollick shared. Ethan Mollick, who Wharton professor who's written a lot on AI generally because he's a college professor. He also thinks about it specifically in the realm of education. But the general concept of the tech overhang is the tech's ability outpacing its kind of day-to-day productivity and applications for what we do right now. And his theory or his proposal is that even if AI stopped right now and didn't develop any further, there would be years of work for education to think about ways that it can be useful in education and cannot be because it's moving so fast. And so to me, that's just more reason to be leaning in, asking hard questions and engaging, but not having the expectation of right now having all the answers.
Yeah, that resonates, and I think to your point, it's also just such a healthy and great orientation to even bring to conversations in your school building, right? Being able to say, "Hey, this is what we know, this is what we don't know," and being able to just model, collaborative leadership and what that looks like, and saying, Let's go on this journey together." Because I think, to your point, if we, especially with this point, and I think this was especially felt after like Chat GPT first became live in 2022, in that first 18 months where it felt like policies were just, being written in pencil and adjusted on a daily basis because it was literally happening. So I think folks have a little bit more clear opinions now as to like what should or should not be included in their policies. And that feels to have, the dust appears to have settled a little bit there. But to your point, like what I'm wondering if folks are thinking about is even just in hearing you say like, this responsibility for a lot of folks that are in tech type roles to be able to say, well, we know there's a moral imperative for us to like lean in and to like understand and to like create guidance here. But what I'm also hoping is equally true is that folks in more programmatic or educator facing roles also like leaning in and feeling this responsibility, because what I'm noticing in just conversations I've been a part of is this trend where I think AI is being very ed techified. And I think folks now, when you talk about, do you know what AI is? They think, oh yeah, I've like played with Magic School or I've played with Chat GPT. So yeah, that's AI. AI is Chat GPT. And it's like, no, it's not just that. It is that, but it's not just that, right? And thinking about all of the ways that AI is going to impact society and lessons learned from other ways where we've had general purpose technologies impact our world positively or negatively, and not having thought about that. And I think the two that really come top of mind for me, where it feels like even if you don't believe that your school should be adopting any AI use cases, you should still probably talk about these two things, which is how do you handle like deep fakes in your school? And like what's the education around that? How do we also talk about boundaries with like young people and like leveraging that and what that is and how it's, and what just how to grapple with that. And then I think we're very related is just relationships with technology, right? Technology now, and I think we started to learn a whole lot from social media about the impact that technology can have on our young people and their mental health. And now we're starting to see early indicators around AI and how a lot of these chatbots, especially ones that are designed to be even, more persuasive, more compelling. We look at tools like character AI, which are some of the most popular AI tools that exist in the world right now. And it is disproportionately young people that are engaging with tools like character AI. And they're engaging because they have chatbots that they can talk to with different personas that they're excited to connect with. And I think we're entering this like potentially uncharted territory, or at least uncharted to me territory, where we are now creating like human like relationships with technology. And I don't know that we have appropriate boundaries or just guardrails for like what that should look like and what a healthy versus non-healthy relationship would look like. And so I would really push schools to even think about what some early conversations around even those topics could look like, and how we can start to get ahead of that.
Oh, I think that is really important that you brought up young people's use of technology, how social media plays in, and kind of the role that education leaders and educators need to be thinking about AI literacy and kind of learn from our past 20 years. We sometimes use this comparison of two powerful technologies launched in the last 20 years and two very different ways that they played out. And one was social media and this, started in the mid '00s, give or take, and then in many ways unleashed with the advent of the smartphone and the ubiquity of the smartphone getting in kids' pockets and increasing use. And it radically changed behavior. And there was little to no research done while it was unfolding, and there was very little regulatory oversight beyond, say, Section 230 that created boundaries for what responsible use looked like, the role of the provider, et cetera, et cetera. And where we've landed with that, and I'm not going to debate like there are many contributors to these things, but what we do know is young people's mental health, feelings of isolation, thoughts of self-harm are at historically high levels. And many indicators point to social media being a contributor. So that's one play out. There's a different play out with also technology that came out very quickly during the pandemic. COVID virus came out and great focus, Operation Warp Speed, focused on development of mRNA vaccines. And these mRNA vaccines were grounded in really solid, fast research on efficacy, one, and it was bounded within government oversight with clear boundaries to protect human health and safety. And how did that play out? They were developed in months, and all data tells us that millions and millions of lives were saved because of that. So, with those two contrasting pieces, and how specifically research and the regulatory environment was handled very differently in both. In one case, social media, none of either. In the other case, appropriate levels of both. And they ended in very different places. And so we have this great opportunity with generative AI on one. We need to early and often be researching what's working and what's not, so we can direct our attention, focus, energy on what's working, do more of that, and pull back on where we're not seeing efficacy and where we might even be seeing harm. And then also looking at the regulatory environments that help the innovation to happen while also protecting kids on data privacy, deep fake harm, et cetera, et cetera. And in our current state, you know, we're probably going to see much of that innovation around regulation becoming at the state level.
Yeah. Well, I mean, well said. I think you're absolutely right that if I were to wave my magic wand and say what could have been different with the deployment of social media and how might we have best positioned ourselves for success to be able to like understand the impact of technology. I think the dichotomy you were kind of sharing there, like, very much sums it up well, right? Which is a big enabling condition there is about research. It's about being thoughtful. It's about understanding what the impact is and how we might be pivoting or making smarter decisions as we continue to navigate the waters there. So, I mean, that being said, like, I feel like we've been hinting at it for a little while there, burying the lead. So, I mean, let's get into it. I know one of the big things you all are prepared to share that you have done a lot of work on is this research study repository. What is that? What is it supposed to do? How is it set up? Walk us through it.
Thank you for that setup, Daniel. So research repository, we launched at the end of January and it is on our website. I'm sure we can link to this in the show notes, but its goal is to collect all the research that exists around Gen AI and K-12 and put it in one place where a practitioner can go and filter for who their user is, what the application is, what the developmental age is, what the why is, and then pull up all the research that exists connected to that topic. So, as a principal, you might say, we've been struggling with middle school math outcomes. So, what does the research say around Gen AI tools that teachers can use as the user that is focused on middle school age and that is around numeracy, around math outcomes. And then it'll pull up all the papers that exist on this. So right now, the body of research, as I alluded to earlier, is quite small. When we launched at the end of January, we had 181 papers there, and only 26 of those are RCTs, so randomized controlled trials, where we can have like clear takeaways that we feel more confident on. And so it's early days. We plan to update this monthly. Actually, in the next week, we plan to roll out a major update of the repository and significantly expand the pool of papers that are in there. But like I was mentioning earlier in our conversation, what we hope to do by providing this tool is give practitioners a resource when they feel like they're getting hit by a number of sales calls from edtech providers on, hey, I've got a great product that can solve this problem for you. Then you can say, huh, what does the research say? Or when you're debating something as a school leadership team and you're saying, okay, does AI play a role in this? You can ask, what does the research say? And you know where you can go to get some answers to those questions. You can go to the repository, you can filter for the need, and you can pull up and you might find one of two things. One, you might find a bunch of great papers that have asked the exact question you're curious about that can help inform you make some research back buying decisions on what tool you want to do. That's great. You also, to to be honest, you might come up with 0 papers in the filter that you and based on all the filters you have, there's literally over 4 billion different combinations of ways to splice it. But you might come up and be like, oh, this is a total blind spot right now. That is also pertinent, valuable knowledge to know. Hey, no research has been done into this area, and that will help you approach your decision making on that issue, that risk mitigation, that buying decision more appropriately. So that's where it stands right now. And we're really excited for people to use it to get out in the world. And we have some plans to improve it, technology enabled in a bunch of different ways in coming months. So also this is a little plug for people to get their hands on it and then also share feedback with us on tell us how you're using it. Tell us what would be more valuable if we added it as a feature. We see many ways to leverage AI to start to make sense of and synthesize the research that does exist, because very quickly the volume of papers in there is going to become more than an individual practitioner can make sense of. So you might filter for something, come up with 25 papers. And as a busy superintendent, you're like, I'm not going to read 25, 50-page academic papers. So can AI help us synthesize that to glean the key insights on that topic across those 25 papers. I'll tell you two use cases right now that we're hearing from users on how they're finding great efficacy with the repository. So, one, right away, I heard from many school leaders on, oh, this is great. I'm going there with questions or something I'm curious about. I filter for what I need. I identify 8 papers. I download those 8 papers and then I upload them into a notebook LM I created. Notebook LM is a Google product. For your listeners that might not be familiar, it's a great tool to give a quote unquote notebook a discrete set of knowledge. So you give it 8 PDFs, these 8 papers, and then the notebook allows you to use AI to engage with the content in those 8 PDFs. So the user then uploads the 8 PDFs to their notebook LM, and they can chat with the papers and ask them questions. They can ask for the high level summary of those 8 papers, the key takeaways for their specific context. They can make a podcast to then listen to a debate between 2 AI voices about the content. They can engage with it a bunch of different ways. So that's one real effective use case we've been hearing. And then another with the launch of deep research by both Google and OpenAI. Specifically, I've heard several use cases of users using the deep research on OpenAI through OpenAI's ChatGPT platform. And all they do is they point their, their chat towards the Generative AI for Education Hub research repository at Stanford University. They tell it to go look there and tell them the question they're wondering about. I am a high school principal looking for what AI supports there might be for developing resilience in my students or developing more social connections to build school cohesion or to improve literacy outcomes, whatever thing that you're curious about to optimize my school schedule. And through ChatGPT research, tell them the context, the question that they're wondering about, tell it explicitly, going to the generative AI research repository, and then it'll take, 5+ minutes to go think, and it comes back. And the reports I've gotten from users, they've often shared their chats with me, are quite good. And what I would say is what gets me most excited is this as a tool to bringing us back to an earlier theme in our conversation, be that bridge from historically denser, longer, sometimes maybe more theoretical research papers and build that bridge to the practitioners who are like, give me the key takeaways. What are the actions I can do today to make progress towards this goal, leveraging AI? What should I be worried about? Where should I be radar up? And where can I lean into?
And just so that I'm understanding that last example, because that would be news to me. I played around with the deep research functionalities a little bit, but maybe not as much as you. So are you saying that some users are essentially saying in their prompts like, "Hey, ChatGPT, like I specifically want you to find sources from the Stanford repository in the inquiry of this question," and then it's like and then in addition to answering the question, it's specifically going to the repository?
It's as simple as that. I
Wow,
played around with it a
cool.
fair bit too of I, kn- you know, quote me on this, some version of this, go to the generative AI for Education Hub research repository at the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. I want you to pull research from that resource and help me investigate X question. Here's some more details about the context I'm working within. Send, ready, go. And then the results they get back. Sources cited, links back to the papers in our repository. So there's a level of transparency and reliability through that, which is, I think, pretty powerful tool.
I can't help but just like reflect in this moment that even some of the early conclusions we thought we were drawing about artificial intelligence are already being challenged. It's like we kept saying a bunch of the narrative out there is AI can really help with these like low to mid cognitive level skills, but it can't help as much with, fact checking information. And I think this is an example of how that may not be very true for very long, right? With deep research functionalities and being able to direct it to really, really good sources of information and doing some of that. So I can't help but just laugh at to your earlier point of even for folks who try to keep a pulse on things and you can't help but feel like you're at square one a couple months later with just the new developments and innovations that are happening.
It is so true. It is so true. And that's why here, I'll get meta for a second. But, I've been, and one theme I hope people are taking away is approach this with a beginner's mind. You don't need to have all the answers, but just get curious and play around. And so, me, in leading the Generative AI for Education Hub, we just built this repository. And I'm telling all your listeners, hey, go play around with the repository and tell us what you're learning. Tell us how you're using it and tell us how it could be better, because we don't have all the answers on how that could be used, but we want to learn from you all and what you're finding out to then like iterate and improve upon it. So trying to practice what I preach there.
Yeah, it sounds great. No, and maybe just so that we can understand a little bit of the requirements. So when for the papers that ultimately make their way on the repository, like what type of screening is involved to understand the rigor of those sources that are added to the repository versus what is not added?
Yeah, that is really important question. So curation is particularly important now because we could very quickly fill that with an insane volume of research that very quickly will make it less usable, right? Because we don't have a AI tool built into it right now to like synthesize and take away and glean key learnings. So we on our team, we have a talented research data scientist, Benjamin Leva, who works for the hub, who has been the key charge in building the repository. And we're actively improving upon our sourcing, selection, and curation of the repository. So in early days, when the pool was pretty small, it was very, as we can say, handmade, in that we basically did a scrape of all the journals on anything related to AI and education, and then hand selected them. Like went through line by line on abstracts and said, this is relevant, this is relevant, this is relevant, etc. And really for the first cycle, that's possible. We are already starting to see a hockey stick increase in the volume of Gen AI research coming out. The vast majority of the research in the repository right now was published in 2023 and 2024. And so it's very recent, and 2025, I'm sure will be a lot more research than 2023 and 2024 combined. So we are building a system that is both more reliable and scalable as the research increases. And I won't bore people with the details, but in short, we have a process that we can run monthly that goes out and looks at all the journals out there where there's published academic research, or this is important, sources like ed working papers that have pre-peer reviewed. But again, we're trying to get speed to insights. And so we want to get stuff as soon as it's out. So it pulls from all of those and then just dumps a huge body of all these papers are generally about AI and education. And then we have a series of prompts that analyze all those papers, grade all those papers based on who our target audience is for the Gen AI and Research Hub, the questions we anticipate that they're curious about, and all the filters that we have on the repository to tag them accordingly. And then we have a protocol for then scoring them. And then above a certain score gets into the repository automatically. And then around the margins, doing hand curation of this is in, this is not, and then improving the prompt and the scoring process as we go. So that will allow us to, again, this is changing fast, that it's only accelerating. So we need to build this in a way that we can deliver on the speed that this field of study is changing. So leveraging AI to do so is important.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you walking us through that because I think, especially in this moment where we were hinting at earlier, I think a lot of vital sources of data, potentially at the federal level, may be phasing out or may not be as up to date as they've been before. And so I think there's a moment here where rigorous sources of analysis and data and research are going to be really important and something I think systems leaders really value. Chris, I feel like we've hit so many things today. What haven't we talked about that you feel is important to share?
I'll just name one more piece as far as maybe this is scaffolding for your listeners on how to engage with the repository in a really productive way. And then I'll just give a couple shout outs to two papers in there to keep this really grounded in the research. So right now, our first step to help users synthesize learnings from all these academic sources and like, what does this mean for me as a practitioner? So there's a few filters that you can go into there right now. One being who is the user. So you could filter for student or teacher or school leader or family caregiver. And if you filter just for student, then it'll pull all the papers that fit that. But at the top, it'll also have here are the key insights that synthesize like what we know about Gen AI and students right now. Or you could filter for teachers. So that's important. You could also, under the filter of study design, you could filter for quasi experimental or literature review or RCT, randomized control trial. And if you just filter, say, for RCT, then it'll pull up all the papers, in this case, 26 of the 181 right now are RCTs. And this is really powerful. At the top, it'll give you, here are the key insights on what we know from RCTs or on Gen AI in education right now. And this is a great just lay of the land. This is what is known. This is what research tells me right now on AI and K. It's a great starting spot. And just starting to go through a couple of those key filters in 30 minutes, you could feel like, oh, I get a sense, like an overall sense on what does the research say in these several categories. So that's a great place to start. And I'll get on now, like drilling down to a couple important RCTs. And both of these are coming out of some of our gifted researchers and professors at Stanford. But I also think they're super important as far as thinking about AI and its role in education. And specifically, that I think a lot of promise around AI right now is specifically around the teacher. When we bring AI to students, that can feel harder, higher risk. Federal law, things like FERPA get involved. So it very quickly gets a lot more complicated. But AI to teachers creates real opportunity. It creates a way to empower and give agency to teachers, to maybe give them some freedom in saving them time for them to get creative. And specifically, two areas that show promise are around teacher augmentation. So AI that doesn't face the student, but AI that supports the teacher to work better human to human with students or just teacher to learner. So one example of the teacher augmentation realm is this important paper. Some of your listeners probably have heard of it already, called Tutor Copilot. Rose Wang and Susanna Loeb were two of the key researchers on this. And at a super high level, I'll, I'll, I'll frame it and then give two key takeaways. So this studied a digital tutoring platform where tutors worked with fourth grade learners. And it's an RCT. So we had some tutors that worked with fourth grade learners as standard. And then we had some tutors that worked with fourth grade learners, but the tutor had an AI that was effectively listening in. And after the student would say something, then the AI would provide three suggestions for how the tutor could respond that were grounded in good pedagogy and good tutoring practice. The tutor could choose to ignore that and say whatever response they chose, or they could choose to take one of those suggestions. And at risk of oversimplifying, two key takeaways. The treatment, so the group that had the AI, the tutors that had the AI support, there were noticeable increases in math outcomes for those fourth grade students that were tutored by those tutors. One. And two, I think the more interesting one was the tutoring provider had previously benchmarked their tutors from high performing, meeting expectations, and low performing. This AI support really didn't have much impact on the high performing tutors. They did their thing, they continued to be effective. But this AI support brought the low performing tutors to meeting expectations. So, real implications for fast tracking talent into teaching, to bringing people up to speed, to actually having real impact on kids faster, sooner, in a more effective way. So, that's one category around teacher augmentation. Last paper I'll mention, because it's also, I think, a real promising area for AI in education. And the category is teacher PD, teacher professional development. So Dora Dembski in 2023, so this is now a year and a half, almost 2 years old, but I think it's still really relevant. And so Dora and team did a mixed methods RCT in classrooms that used TeachFX. And so TeachFX, for those not familiar, is an AI tool that listens to audio in a classroom, listens to what the teacher is saying specifically, and then at the end of a session, will give a report out to the teacher on here was your some simple metrics like here was your talk time as compared to your volume of student talk time. And then also, like, what type of talking were you doing? Were you lecturing, being didactic? Were you asking questions more, getting students to think? And also, at risk of oversimplifying, but to cutting to key takeaways here that I think is really interesting is in this RCT, those teachers that use the TeachFX tool to get feedback, the AI generated feedback led to a 20% increase in teachers' use of deep questioning techniques. So more advanced teaching strategies to help develop more deep thinking, deep learning on the student side. So I share those as just to make it tangible, to make it practical on two RCTs that I think are meaningful in the way of teacher augmentation or teacher PD that show promise for future research and impact in the future in education.
Yeah, I mean, you got my wheels turning so much with those 2, and I think it affirms a lot of what I've been learning in different spaces too. I think well, my first maybe cheeky reaction is, "You mean to tell me that we're still gonna need teachers in the classroom in the
Yes,
future?"
hooray!
You know what?
Celebrate that.
Whoa, okay, alright.
Yes,
Breaking news, right?
good
We're gonna
news.
need
That is the headline. Yes. I
yeah,
will I will I will put all my chips into the center of the table on teacher's role is only going to be more human teacher's role will only be more important. That is
yeah.
what I that's the world I want to see in the future.
Could not agree more. I will also throw in a couple of initial anecdotes that were coming up for me. I think especially in that initial study you had referenced around just the teacher augmentation and the performance boost for the lower or the new coming performers and getting them to make expect it actually very aligned to a person you mentioned earlier. I know Ethan Mollick, he actually did a study with Harvard looking at consultants with Boston Consulting Group. They essentially found the same thing that using AI and allowing consultants to use AI, it didn't really help the great consultants be any greater, but it really helps the consultants who were like below the curve, like get up to like during the curve with the access to those tools. So it's interesting to hear just even in different contexts how there might be some similar findings there. And just my mind is was immediately turning so much to just think about implications for teacher certification programs, alternative certification programs, knowing that currently with the way the system is set up in the United States, there's just so much turnover in the teaching profession. So you have a lot of teachers that fall into that like 0 to 5 years of teaching experience and whatever you can do to get them to feeling like really confident in the classroom using those like more really critical check for understanding type strategies as quickly as possible so that they feel confident and they're really like impacting their performance. That feels like such a really vital resource. And then very connected to the second study that you had mentioned, I think the audio is very interesting, and I've also been exposed to conversations where folks are thinking about the video components too, which is like especially as we get more AI tools that have access to text to video, what the implications of being able to record just the teacher teach for 60 minutes, and then it just offers its perspective and feedback based on some of the things, not just but now not just considering the context of your words and your voice, but also just your presence and those things you might be signaling just in how you're showing up in your energy as well, and how valuable some of that might be in a school-based context where teachers may only have access to feedback from, say, an assistant principal or an instructional coach potentially on a weekly basis at best, and now getting that
Right.
on a daily cadence if they aspire to have something like that.
I think that is so true. And I love that you brought it at the end there to in future worlds, and whether this is student facing or teacher facing, I don't see this as that humans are removed from the teacher feedback coaching process entirely. But let's get practical today. Like, if a teacher is getting observation and feedback from another human being once a week, that's really special. Like, that is like 99th percentile in schools that are able to do that. There are many schools where maybe that happens once a year. And with through technology, could teachers get way more reps on that feedback with much greater frequency through technology, once a day, once a week? And then that time of that previously one peer could come in and give observe them once a year, that could be reallocated to that human being, helping them make sense of the feedback they've got and to coach them through how they're going to take action on what they've learned to build future strategies to improve their practice, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a great example of like the augmentation and support rather than the replacement.
Well, and I think another thought that had been coming up for me as you were sharing, and actually very serendipitously connected to like how we started this conversation, just around self-actualization and these like more meaningful experiences for our young people. I once read a blog post by the person who's like leading AI at Sacramento State, Sasha Sidorkin, and I had him on for a conversation last year. And one thing he had wrote this blog about how one of the potentials for AI as well for the role of the teacher is it's not that their role is diminished at all in this context. And I think that's very much what we're saying as well, but it evolves, it transforms, right? Where they're leaning in versus where they can lean out now becomes transformed. And I think where he really hypothesized is that it really can unlock for the teachers, like open up so much more of that relational work, right? Which is like why I think so many teachers get into teaching and education is to like mentor young people, to like be there to share life advice, to help them on their journey. And they just don't have time in the day to do those things. And so I see, in addition to like some of the pieces you were naming in these studies of helping you to become sharper at your craft, I think the other layer of this is outsourcing some of the pieces that they shouldn't be doing at all, and just the mastery and being able to do this more efficiently is going to open up so much of more of that like relationship building, that life advice, those experiences, just connecting like as a wise adult helping our next generation, that I think so many teachers like hunger for, and what keeps them energized and connected to the work, which doesn't happen at the rate that I think we aspire for it to happen. And so that was also just, I think, unlocked for me even further in some of these studies, it just affirming that no, that's where we should be going. That's where we should be putting our chips, and let's and hopefully the research continues to support that, or affirm that that's the way we should be going as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. That's excellent.
Chris, I feel like we hit so many topics today. Any closing thoughts before we end our time together here?
I would say I would leave people also in the with this in the spirit of making this very tangible. I would leave people with one very simple 3-point framework of just what we're observing in talking to a lot of school and district leaders across the country that is starting to show up, but is pretty universal, too strong of a word, but a pattern in that often schools are focusing in 1 to 3 areas as they're starting to dip their toe into AI. So I offer this as one way that those school and district and state leaders can start getting applied. So one, AI literacy. and specifically AI literacy for all. So thinking about all your stakeholder groups, it's not only AI literacy for students, only AI literacy for teachers, but like it's school leadership, teachers, students, the community, and family caregivers. But AI literacy for all. So starting to think about that. Two, and this is classic like early adoption change model, but lots of schools and districts are starting to see success here is they're designating an early adopter group. It's a group of early adopter teachers, maybe some instructional leaders or district school leaders. And I think where it gets really interesting is also involving students because students can be at the real leading edge here, but it's our early adopter group. It's an experimentation group on and give them a little more freedom to explore and see what's possible. And it can really help school and district leaders to they can tap into that group and see where the future might be going. They don't have to be doing all the experimentation themselves, but they can use this as like an early indication group. So that's two, the experimenting group and identifying that. And they come together, say once a month. And three, getting really practical. And schools are playing around with operational systems, back end office, ways to apply it because it can feel very tangible and also lower stakes because we only have adults engaging with the tool. So we're mitigating risk there. The a lot of the business applications, business systems, tools can be a bit more defined. And all schools and districts have business systems that they have to take care of. And so that can be a way that can feel more accessible to some schools and districts to start experimenting with, oh, what if does AI play a role here and give them more confidence to roll it out in the things we truly care about. Your listeners to visit the repository and share feedback with us at the Generative AI for Education Hub.
Thanks, Chris. Very much appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Why we're all here, which is around teaching and learning. So those are just three ways and patterns and what we're seeing in some early adoption for schools. And Daniel, I've really enjoyed our conversation and encourage your listeners to visit the repository and share feedback with us at the Generative AI for Education Hub.
Thanks, Chris. Very much appreciate your time today.